Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nidus Anarchy series. I'm your host Adam, CIO and co-founder of Nidus, and today I want to talk about the use of AI within identity management tools. So I recently spoke with a company that is integrating AI into their IAM suite of tools, and they're doing it in a pretty cool way. They're actually training models, fine-tuning models, and building learning around what your systems are doing with your data sets, all in a siloed compartment. And this allows them to basically take in everything that your identity management system is doing and do all kinds of real-time queries and returning the data. Kind of like using a RAG system, but with lot more going on, right? It's not as simple as just a simple RAG. So the company that I got to look at their software with and really talk about the details is VEZA and their VEZA AI system that's coming out. I got to speak with the CEO for a little bit about the software, and honestly, overall, it's pretty cool what they're doing. They're very much in early beta stages, so I'm not really sure what I can and can't say. Maybe I can get him on here and we can interview, and then he can say everything that he wants. It really just kind of opened up my eyes with where AI is going and how it's going to be used. So that's kind of really what I wanted to talk about. We're so used to AI where most people out there just interact with an LLM, right? Like go to ChatGPT and you type in a question and you get an answer, or maybe using Claude, or maybe using Cursor and Windsurf to do coding and development. And there's lots of really cool stuff with AI, but most of it is really APIing calls back to a backend like OpenAI. Now, what's interesting about what Veza is doing is they're really incorporating and integrating AI into their IAM systems a lot more on a lower level and for real world usage, not just to answer questions. It's pretty neat to see what they're doing. So Veza is actually using AWS Bedrock as the interface for all the AI work, and they're using Claude for the backend, which is awesome because that's one of my favorites, as I've talked about tons and tons of times. So being able to use Claude Sonnet or even Haiku for quicker things that aren't really that layered is pretty rad that they're integrating this, and they're actually fine tuning local models. So the way they're setting this up is you'll have your own siloed Claude LLM that's being fine tuned on your data as it goes, which is pretty cool. I don't know the intricacies of it. We didn't get to go that deep. I'm hoping to find out more, but it's pretty neat to see what they are doing. Now, what they did get to show was kind of a sample of their AI search, which is taking all the information of all the systems and users and permissions and roles and all the things that Veza has access to, and being able to give real-time information back to the user. So you could say something along the lines of like, what access does George have? And it will show all the different accesses that George has. It'll say, all the different roles they have, the systems that they have access to. And it allows it to really build out more fine-grained responses too. So it's kind of, from what I understand it was doing, is it's taking the AI LLM question that you ask it, is turning it into some type of like almost like a SQL query to then grab all the information from all this backend systems and then responding it to the user in a graph uh, in a graph UI in front of the user, which is pretty rad. The one thing that I saw, which I think could be an issue, and these guys are very well aware of it. Let me just say this: I'm not like trying to point out a flaw in their system. It's more just it's a it's something that I noticed that they also said they are actively working on and understand. So it's not like, oh my gosh, this thing is flawed. I just want to make that very clear. Is the introduction of hallucinations into results, right? So this is one of the big key metrics that I think is going to be super important moving forward that I never thought of until I literally was staring at this and asked the question, how often does this thing hallucinate? Like, what's the percentage of accuracy that these things are returning results on that you can bank on and make decisions on? And they don't have the metrics on that yet. And I wouldn't expect them to, right? Right now, they're building out the tool, they're going through beta, they're trying to figure out how those things works together. So, I'm not expecting them to have this thing perfectly figured out and have all the metrics ready because they're not actively selling it as far as I know. But that is one thing that really kicked into me, which is hallucinations in the security space are massively risky, right? Because if the AI comes back to say, hey, let's just take that same one. What access does George have to our systems? And it comes back and says, oh, they have access to Okta and they have access to these databases, and they have access to these websites and whatever. You're like, oh, okay, cool. He doesn't have access to the banking and financial system. Well, what if it just didn't grab that on the response? What if it just missed that one for some reason? Because that does happen, especially if you've worked with RAG systems and fine tuning. Like you can ask, here's a little thing. Ask an AI system, an LLM, whatever, a question, and then ask it that same exact question all over again. You're going to get a very similar response, but certain pieces of information are going to be left out in that next response. This is kind of the concern I have, and I'm curious to see how they're going to how to not necessarily resolve it, but what they're doing to mitigate hallucinations. Because even if it were to hallucinate 0.01% of the time, that's still too much, right? Like everything has to be, when you're talking about access controls and audits and reporting of things like this that are going to be used for governance, you're going to have to make sure that it's 100% accurate 100% of the time. So that's really the big question that's come about that I'm never really thought of, that I'm wondering, how are they going to solve this? How do you prevent hallucinations in something as critical as access security in your identity management system? I know I didn't get an answer from them. I don't have the answer, right? This is an answer I think everyone in AI is trying to solve, which is really just how do you eliminate hallucinations or minimize it to a place to where you can say, hey, look, I can guarantee that this result is true and factual 100%. I don't know of any AI system that can do that. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see where this goes. Um, I've always seen AI with regards to like risk factors and scoring things and basically giving you kind of a fuzzy answer in response. So it's like, oh, hey, should we step up authentication here? Well, based on all the stuff that AI inferred, yes or no. And if we were to have a false flag event, it really wouldn't matter because that person would be stepped up. They have to authenticate. Oh, well, we just had to, do it. Now, if it was doing it every single time, obviously we need to tweak our scores. But for the most part, a 0.01% failure rate of registering a risk as being not risky and you default to a risk to a step up or something, you kind of can capture that. So I'm not sure how they're doing it, but it's going to be pretty interesting to see. Overall, though, their whole plan on how they're going to be integrating AI throughout the VEZA suite, it's actually pretty cool. They have a lot of different tools that are already out there, and they're basically saying, how can we integrate AI into this? And the one thing I got to say is I'm very impressed that they're not just slapping on, an API into ChatGPT and saying, oh, you can ask it questions and it responds back with, formatted JSON or something. And look, ta-da, we have AI in our system. Like these guys have some real AI engineers that know what they're talking about and are really working with the right way to do it. So it's actually pretty cool. So I'm going to leave this as an open invitation. I'd love to have someone from VEZA to come on to Nidus Anarchy series and talk with me and really go into the nuts and bolts of how this thing is working. Whatever you can tell would be great. The more information, the better. But I'd love to really pick the brains of how is this really happening and what's kind of the real plan. Like, I've the calls that I was on was all about kind of, I don't want to say marketing because it was much more low level. The guys that the engineers and developers were on the call, so it wasn't like a big sales pitch or anything, but it was a 1 hour introductory call of like, hey, check out what we have, and I totally hijacked it just to talk about and ask a million questions about how does this work? How does this work? Well, how does this work? And I felt so annoying at the end of the hour. I actually apologized. Everyone kind of laughed and said not a big deal. And actually what people wanted from the side why they brought me onto the call was they wanted those questions asked because they didn't know what questions to ask. So it worked out pretty well. But yeah, so this is an open invitation to someone at VEZA to come on here and explain to me what all the cool stuff is that you're working and we can spend as long or as little as you have. Hopefully, the more time, the better, because I'm really curious as to what you guys are doing because I really love the idea about how you're actually using real AI in these systems, and there's a lot of tricks, and I'm really curious to see how are you going to solve all these weird issues that are coming up that are going to be new in the AI development world for IAM. So if you also have other software, if you know other software vendors that are working in AI like this that are really doing actual fine tuning and training models and doing really cool actual AI stuff, I'd love to hear about it because this stuff is really cool and this is absolutely where the world is going. So if you're using some form of an identity management system and your vendor is not currently working on integrating AI into every piece of that AIM framework that you have, might want to start looking at another vendor. Until then, I will see you guys around. Later. Nidus has just created the first iOS app made exclusively for identity management professionals. It's called Nidus Breachcast, and you can download it now. It's amazing. We have real-time updates of all the latest breaches that are occurring, CVEs as they come out real-time, really pertaining just to identity management. We have media that's going on this podcast. We're going to be bringing in a lot more others as well. And we even have a complete vendor list of all the identity management vendors and all their products, so you can find out exactly where to download their software, all the documentation. And what's even more awesome is an identity management glossary. All those crazy words and acronyms that we can never remember, they're all listed in there for you. No ads, just pure information to make your life simple.